What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Hail to the King, the 70-year Godzilla film retrospective we are doing here on the Snobs channel, and we're having such a great time. It's a big night. It's a super night, if you will, and we appreciate you guys watching and being a part of it. So we had to make a super episode. We're talking about 5 films in this episode. Well, one squeaks in, but we're really going to be talking about 4, which this is the only episode where we're talking about more than 3, and it's exciting, and we are getting into it. We're going to finish out the Showa era. This is Ishiro Honda's final film in the series. Maybe his final film ever. I'm not 100% sure. I have to double check that as a director, but in the series, yes, this is where we are graduating from it. 10 years later, we are going to see, 9 years later, we're going to see Godzilla come back in a big way, and it's going to start a new trek down a new path of devastation and fun. So we're going to get into it. Of course, my esteemed colleagues are here to join me for this. Sir Sturdy from the Horror Sir Sturdy podcast on Popcorn and Pints. Make sure to go check them out. Everything's linked down below. And then my buddy Trevor Stottlemyre from Ambassador Radio and Media. Everything again is linked below. You got to go follow these guys. They're so smart and they're so awesome, and I love hanging out with them and talking movies. And they do even more on their end. So you're gonna want to follow them. But let's get into it. Let's talk about these 4 Godzilla films and one more, but we'll get there. All right, guys, let's get into it. Hail to the King, baby. Guys, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I appreciate you being here, and we're talking Godzilla. How are you guys doing today?
Very good.
Well,
happy to be here.
How you guys doing along? Let's take a moment and think about it for a sec. How is the rewatch going for you? We've just finished a lot of films. So how do you guys, are you enjoying it still? Are you feel regenerated getting into a new era?
So this is a watch for me. This isn't even a rewatch. This is a first time watch for me. The last 3 movies, I told my wife this earlier today because she was like, how are you enjoying these ones so far? So I was like, the last 3 movies, I loved those. Those are my favorite 3. Not talking -1. That's different. That's in the future. Those are my favorite 3 out of the films that we watched by far. I really adore those 3 films. And I think it's because it ties me into my childhood as far as what I was telling you guys with the last episode with the VR troopers and all that and the Power Rangers. I really loved that about those. I really loved that. Those really. I'm just like, oh man, oh man. I wasn't expecting that from those.
No.
And then
these new recent ones that we're going to get into from the 80s, those are your favorites so far?
No, the last 3.
Oh, wow. Okay.
By far. Oh my God, I just love. I adore those 3 so much, so freaking much. Just because I just had so much fun with them. I had so much fun with them.
They are fun movies. And Trevor, how about you, man? How you doing with the rewatch?
Oh, it's been an amazing amount of fun. As I've said in the past, it is the first time I've thought about chronologically watching the films. And you do get a very different take on, especially Honda's films when you watch them in order. So this has been great. It's been an amazing opportunity that I probably would have looked over if I wasn't given the chance. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you sharing that with me. And actually, on that, talking about that, I'm wondering, what is something watching it chronologically for the first time that you've learned as a fan that you didn't realize before?
How much thematically connected the early Honda films are, and how connected. For me as a fan, I always viewed like Invasion of the Astro Monster as that kind of really weird one in space that for me personally was weirder than like Smog Monster or Hedorah. But I also had never watched the films afterwards, which brings us to Terror of Mechagodzilla, that if Astro Monster did not exist, you would not have, all the connecting theme and even villains that led up to the end of the Showa era. I mean, of course, there were the offshoots, the Son of Godzilla, and that kind of stuff that, honestly, there's all kind of crummy stuff with there. But in general, without Astro Monster, you wouldn't see aliens and like the Cetopians taking the place of what Japan wanted to do, which was point the finger at other countries that abuse them.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. That's such a great point. And I'm really watching these and filling gaps for me, like the ones that I have seen when I was a kid, and now getting into this new era. Because I am almost done with the 90s, just so everybody knows, because I got to jump ahead to kind of plan out the episodes. And I don't want to get there, but I want to say comparatively where I'm at mentally in these movies is so much different than the Showa era, but not better or worse. I don't feel like anything I'm having a different kind of fun, and I love that evolution of where Godzilla brings us. And we're going to talk about that a lot tonight because we see that evolution. That's why I bring this up. And to kind of get into it, let's start with the Terror of Mechagodzilla, and this essentially, of course, being a direct sequel from the previous of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. How did you guys feel coming back into this one? Mechagodzilla is clearly the bad guy in this. Was it something for you? What was this movie for you guys? Did you like it as a sequel?
No.
Really? Okay.
I didn't. I like, for me, I feel like all the fun that they had in the first one, they took away in this one, and I'm just like, why did you guys, like, why? It really like, I was really up. I didn't think I was gonna get this emotional about a damn Godzilla movie. And one that wasn't even like, and I don't mean emotional like as far as like happy or sad, as far as like, you know, how the beautiful one is, but just like with this one, I'm just like, oh my god, like you went from like bringing me back to my childhood to just slapping me. I was so upset with it. I'm just like, why did you do this to me? What you took all just it just I felt like they took that. I don't want to say the kiddiness away because it wasn't, because those ones weren't really kitty movies. But whatever that innocence I felt from those, or whatever it was from those three that I felt from those, I did not feel it with this one, and I was hoping to. And it just, I'm just like, oh, I'm upset, guys. I was like, I don't even want to watch this anymore. But I did. But it was just one of those ones where it just kind of just, it just took that high from me. It took because those three, I left on a high with those. I'm up here going into it. This, I'm like, oh shit, Mechagodzilla again. Yes, no.
You know, and to that point, and I want to ask you, Trevor, I do notice such a big difference in the contrast of the filmmaking of these in the tone. And now, after you say that, Sturdy, thank you. Like with Ashira Honda coming in, this is clearly seems like they knew this was the end, sort of. And bringing him in, it did really shift that tone from, I think it was Jun Fukunda directed the last one.
Yeah. Yeah. That was, in my opinion, the Mechagodzilla he did was his best Godzilla movie. That was Jun Fukada at his best.
Oh, okay. So and there you go. So like it was such a really good one. What how do you feel about this one, Terror of Mechagodzilla, and where it stands?
I really enjoyed this film. It is a direct sequel. One of the things I love is a lot of the old gang are back for it. And, you know, for me, except for Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, I feel the score really worked there. The kind of whimsy, because it's kind of a whimsical film, but this one is by far more serious. And Akira Ifube, classic music and new cues. For me, you know, it's hard to see Godzilla and not think of the iconic music. So for me to have that iconic music back was very important. It propelled the drama, you know, in a way that, you know, harked me back to what I thought was Godzilla. But there's a lot of shifts as far as, you know, theme. In this film, your scientist is, you know, not doing what science did in the other films. He was maligned and thrown out of the academic world because he found Titanosaurus. And nobody believed him. And he figured out how to communicate with Titanosaurus. And you could control Titanosaurus. So for 30 years, he's viewed as a lunatic. And when the space villains approach him, he's not in any moral ambiguity at the time. He's like, I don't give a shit about humanity. Let's take him out. So there's a shift there. There's, you know, it is, I hate to use the term darker, but, you know, even though, I mean, here's the thing, you know, it is part of the Showa era. And, you know, the scientist does, you know, come to, you know, a moral place and he gets his comeuppance. But also there's this weird love affair between, a main character and AI. And that's really strange. It's something you didn't necessarily see. So for me, the best of this movie is to see, how Honda wanted to change the themes.
Yeah, I really appreciate bringing that up because it really does change a lot of themes. It does get dark, and I can see why Sturdy comparatively like having so much fun and then getting to this one. Now, let me ask you before we like kind of move off of it, any last thoughts of Terror Mechagodzilla? But do you think, knowing this is the end of Godzilla at that time in 1975, they think this is the end, we're probably not going to make any more, do you think that this is the right way to end it?
I think the synchronicity was there for the right way to end it, because several of the themes that I brought up and the more pessimistic attitude of the film actually plays a great deal. And of course, I mean, it's late end Showa. There's goofy shit that happens in that film just because that's the way it is.
Yeah.
But it actually, and there are two, but we're talking about Terror Mechagodzilla, actually, I think really influenced what started in the 90s. And we'll talk about that, of course, here in a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that too. So for me, I think this was going out on top. I don't think this was exactly the best way to end it. Series, but like, especially being so far ahead and seeing what they did in certain times where they thought it was going to end, sort of how it jumped off. And again, I'm trying to be cryptic a bit because we're not there yet, but it just is, thinking back at this, like, I think this is like at the point with 15 films and they've kind of gone all over the place. This is the best way to do it, and do it with Mechagodzilla, who had to be huge at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I can agree with that. As much, even though I wasn't really a big fan of this one, but I can agree with that. That does make sense.
Yeah, just from a filmmaking standpoint, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Anyway. So this is 1975. Terror Mechagodzilla ends that Showa era. Toho does not go on to make another one until 1984, which we're going to go on to next. But I wanna talk to Trevor for a second. And Trevor, there's another version, Italian version of Godzilla, and if you could elaborate a little bit more about that, I'd really appreciate it.
Okay, so I don't 100% understand why, except for the fact he was a huge kaiju fan. There's a writer and director out of Italy who is still alive, Luigi Cozzi. Now, Luigi Cozzi did make some films you might have seen, especially if you're my age, like the Lou Ferrigno Hercules. Yeah, that you don't have to say it, much less the sequel. Star Crash, which came out and was somewhat successful as a truly lame Star Wars ripoff, but he hit his peak with the kind of alien ripoff Contamination. In short, not a talented person, but he's part of that echelon because he's just like, he'll do whatever, Argento or whatever, especially Argento asks of him. He also runs a retail store called Profondo Rosso, named after Argento's Deep Red, and sells giallo-oriented stuff. So there's Cozzi in a nutshell. He decides that he wants to redub the film into Italian, use very, at the time, kind of technology into colorization. Now you have to remember also at the time this was kind of even being pushed by Ted Turner. So you had all these old films come out in bright color and look like some fucked up comic book. Well, this really did. And it is a horrible colorization of the film. There's no creativity there. It was just supposed to quick make a dime. And of course, it kind of fell into obscurity for the same reason as, say, a film like Abby, which is a blaxploitation Exorcist ripoff, is because when Toho found out about it, they were like, no. So sometimes viewed as a parody because that's the only way it really can exist. So there's Luigi Cozzi's Italian Gods.
And I will tell you, I tried. It's on YouTube. I watched 3 seconds of it, and my eyes just felt like they were going to explode. I don't know what he did with that color. I don't know if it was a transfer thing, but I just did not.
Menace was better at doing individual frame coloring.
Oh God!
In like 1919. I mean,
geez, that one hurt. But yeah, thank you so much, though, Trevor. I appreciate it.
No,
because if we're gonna do a 70-year retrospective, we got to add everything, and at least we talk. And actually, wasn't there a Godzilla cartoon that came out in the 80s before the Return of Godzilla? Right?
Really?
Yes, there was a short-lived. It was about maybe for lucky 3 seasons. Godzilla cartoon that was marketed specifically through the US. It was highly influenced by the very good Marvel comic run of Godzilla at the same time, but it also was focused at the Saturday morning cartoon crowd. So even though it was a great cartoon, I wouldn't put it, in like Thundercats echelon or anything, but it was solid. And the only bad thing about it was due to the fact of what it was, it felt it had to imply, or no, probably not imply, but include more humorous child elements. And that's where you get, like, instead of Manila, there's this weird Godzilla dragon kind of thing that can speak and flies around and can, just show up places named Godzuki. So, I look for it to come out due to the fact that the omnibus of the really good Marvel comic 1980s run is going to be released at the end of this year. Because if you're a Godzilla fan, last 10 years we have been inundated with Godzilla comic books.
Yes. Yeah. That is for sure. And you can a lot of prequel stuff coming out, especially for the new movie coming out. So make sure to go check that stuff out. But appreciate you sharing both of those things with us. So that way we have a little bit of background. And let's continue on. Let's continue on with the Return of Godzilla from 1984. This was a way for Toho to kind of revisit the past, kind of wash away a lot of the other movies besides the very first Godzilla movie in 1954, revisit it. But there was a clear, concise, this was supposed to be almost I would equate it to what Halloween 1978, what Halloween 2018 was. It was supposed to be ended. It was supposed to be over. They revisited it. They paid homage to it. So it's a very clear, concise ending to it with the Return of Godzilla. But then we get more. So we'll get there. But let's start with the Return of Godzilla, which is to me a direct sequel to 1954's Godzilla. I really enjoyed the movie. I just watched it for the first time the other day because I had missed it the first time. I couldn't find a copy of it. And Sturdy, thank you for finding that.
Yes, sir.
So finally being able to watch it, I watched it after 1985. So it's weird that how the influence actually changed things up a little bit for me. I liked it. It's not my favorite out of these series. I think it was a beautiful story. I thought it was a great modernization for the 80s of what Godzilla was. I'm glad that it wasn't the end. But what did you guys think about the movie?
I'm 0 for 4 on this one, honestly. It's like, just, I don't know what it is. I'm just so attached, and I usually don't do this with movies, to where, like, when I'm reviewing them and watching, I know we're not doing a review, but even just like a discussion, I keep going back to these last 3, and I'm just thinking, like, those 3 right there are probably gonna be my favorite 3 of the whole. That's what I'm thinking right now. I'll probably be off by the time we get, a few years down the road. But it's just like, none of these really grab me to where I'm just like, I'm excited to watch these. I did think this was a good story, though. I did think it was a really good story. With this one, it just wasn't for me for this. I may have even liked Mecha a little more than this one and the other in 85. Excuse me, as well.
Trevor, how about you? This coming in?
Well, okay, so I remember actually seeing Godzilla 1985 in a theater, and I think I shared it with you. At the time, I had, loved the Showa stuff so much. that when Godzilla dies at the end of this film, I remember being in the theater bawling. Okay, so why does Return of Godzilla, or Godzilla 1985, it eventually became truncated in the United States, why does it exist? Well, it's not the success of the Godzilla films, it's about the iconography of Godzilla. Godzilla became a brand, and that, that, and also global syndication television also did a huge amount of the Showa Godzilla films, building over this about 9-year period this, fan base. So bringing him back just made sense. Now to, bring him back in the way he was intended as a villain, I really liked that. What irked me about the films, but it also added character, it's very distinctly a product of the 80's in every way. The way it is filmed, how it dress. So it's, even though it was part of that, it's a little harder to connect because it's such a drastic change. But what was really fascinating for me, besides it is a great story, and the science is takes a new place where science now is logical, and it's searching out things that instead of going, we just can't use the A-bomb, going, well, what else can we learn about this creature? And which the big thing, which also pretty awesome for the time period, is make the connection of Godzilla as prehistoric monsters with a connection to birds, because it became even more globally accepted among dinosaur heads that all dinosaurs came from birds. So him having this ability to be, migration of birds based on, his brain, he's got serious ADHD when it comes to birds. So, like Godzilla's destroying things and there's a flock of geese, and they pick up on that. And, they use this really interesting way to defeat Godzilla. And I think those are all pluses.
Yeah, I
But
did
I
like
think it suffers from the 80's factor for me.
I was gonna say, just off of what one thing you said about the birds, that is one thing I was like, there's a lot of fucking birds in this movie.
Yeah. Well, the bird thing, yeah. No, I think I'm kind of bleeding more into 1985, because a lot. I mean, it's essentially the same movie with, again, with putting Raymond Burr in.
Yeah.
But whereas I like the original 1954 version better than the 56 version with Raymond Burr, it's vice versa here for me, to kind of roll into the two, because they're essentially very similar movies. I didn't mind the comedic elements added to 85. It made it because I think now that I'm watching it from this perspective of, yeah, he is a brand. That's who is Godzilla. So like, I'm kind of cool with keeping the brand alive and having those comedic elements show up. And Raymond Burr played a great role in this one. Whereas before, it didn't seem like he really understood the gravitas of Godzilla, and he was just kind of thrown into this, filming scenes in a backlot somewhere. This one, it felt like after 30 years, he, acting, like he stepped in. He was like, I'm going to take this very seriously. I'm going to treat this, so like, I don't know. It felt, I really enjoyed this one, this 1985. The Return of Godzilla, I thought was really, it was a good movie, but 1985 for me was
just
like
better.
where it really shined.
Well, I think 1985 is a more compact centered film, so its pacing is really good. And I haven't seen 85 for a long time, so I didn't rewatch it. But one of the things I really did, I meant to say it, I love about Godzilla 1984 is, okay, so in those 9 years, you're looking as far as the writers, and there were kind of older directors that came on for these films, but there's a new sensibility to the Japanese generation. It's still technically in the Showa period as far as the emperor, but people are starting to, come to grips with, feudal etiquette is bullshit. We really can't trust exactly what our government does. And also, the biggest one, you had a generation that was willing to honestly say what a lot of generations in Japan couldn't, is Hiroshima, Nagasaki, everything afterwards, fuck you, United States.
Yeah.
And this film does it because it focuses on, at least for the return, on the whole Reaganomics of Star Wars, but also, the government doesn't know if it should let people know, and keeps it pretty secret until it can't. But the other countries that come to the table and say, okay, so Germany and the United States says we are using nuclear weapons. It is not a question, and you want to know why? We have interest in your country based on our country. And then to have the prime minister at the time go, no, we're doing this for us, no nuclear weapons.
Mhm.
And think, if we came to you asking the same crap, what would you do? And that's a revelation in the Godzilla films, which really impacts the rather nihilistic films to come.
Yeah.
Because the idea of criticizing who should be criticized from day one, the United States, that was a no-no. It was all allegory in the previous Godzilla films. So
that's a great point. And yes, I do love that scene and in Return of Godzilla when he's fighting with them, like, because at one point then when they even fire it and you're kind of like, it's very reminiscent of almost like the Avengers. That scene when they're just kind of like, all right, we're gonna fire it, and it's like there's people there. What are you talking about? Like, and they have to save it. But the impact of bringing that message back from the 50s and bringing the message back of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it is felt in this movie. And I think that's why I really like this movie as a standalone sequel to the original. And I do, and I will rewatch this. The Godzilla fan in me is like 1985 is the one I would definitely go watch more and more.
Can I ask either one of you, especially Sturdy, a question pertaining to this film before we move on?
Yeah, of course.
What did you guys think of the Godzilla in this film? The suit art and the non-suit art. Was it an advance, or was it, what's your feelings?
I liked it a lot. I like the look. I think this is the look that I most associate with Godzilla. And maybe not this particular movie, but going forward,
just that look.
I would even say maybe a few movies away from this is more the look. But I like where they went with the look. I like 80. There's not much difference between 84 and 85, so it's
it's the same.
It's the same footage, so it's like but I would say I really liked as a comeback look. Like, this was a good look for me.
I'm gonna have to agree with you. I'm gonna have to agree with you on that. Because I'm just going back and looking at pictures of it, and just to get like a fresh visual of it, and I like that look.
But I attribute it to the sets that are built. They're a lot more intricate, and I attribute it to the lighting too.
Well, also you're looking at the first time that full-fledged animatronics are being used as far as special effects. You still have a man or woman in a suit, but as far as facial features, everything, it's animatronic. Or also, as you pointed out, Sturdy, I mean, you have like this huge Godzilla foot that is on set. But there were several times, because honestly, I felt the animatronics were a little, I mean, it's the 80s, 84, so, whatever. But there were times that they used those animatronics, especially when Godzilla would lift his head and roar or whatever, that amazingly, it harked back to some of the crude elements of the special effects and suit from the original version, at least for me, because his neck would be out of line, and I found actually, instead of going, I found that endearing. So.
Okay, I wonder if that's why they kind of kept it. Like that little stuff is nice, and I can't think of it in this movie particularly, but I can think of it in a few things going forward where it's sort of like that. It is endearing, honestly. Like, the modernization is good, but it doesn't feel like it's too detached from the Showa era. So like I said, like the models are way more intricate. You have billboards there with like the product placement and everything. Like, it's really cool. And like, even like, it's not just green floor that look mossy with a bunch of buildings that were just from far away. Like, there are certain, when you get into these movies, there are certain times where it's like there's a river and there's bridges and there's, and it's, they really do such a wonderful job coming back into it to really build it up. They didn't sell out on it. Like, you could really tell they treat this character with so much respect to put in filmmaking, and that's a lot, and I love that. So I think that's why I'm so invested. And 1985 I saw before, so I think that got me reinvested. That's why when I went back and watched 84, I'm like, well, if I stick with this one, I'm not as invested. But so to you guys, what's your, I don't want to do a versus of like, because I do like both movies, but which one do you guys prefer?
I'm probably with you on the 85, honestly. I'm probably with you with the 85 one, but I wasn't really a fan of, I didn't really care for either one, but I'm looking back at the next one. I loved the next one, and I forgot that I loved the last one, 89.
Me too. So let's
the horror elements of it. But as far as, what about you though, Trevor, for that, what Mick is asking, did you ever
I personally, in the end of the day, I have to say the original version, Return of Godzilla, is the most interesting to me. I have to agree with you, Mick. I have more positive reminiscence about this film than how I honestly feel about it. You know, for me, this was a Godzilla that was in '85 was released in theaters in a podunk town of Hagerstown at the time, which I guess really wasn't podunk, but I went to Hagerstown and I saw it. So, you know, it sticks as that kind of like, you know, first, you know, full-fledged cinematic, you know, experience with Godzilla for us.
Yeah,
that's awesome. I love that. And and another one I really appreciate is because, again, these next series of movies are all connected, even more so than how like you were saying with the flow of the Showa movies. You know, we get central character that gets introduced. We get a lot more to them, but it starts, essentially, I'd say it starts with Godzilla versus Biollante, or 1985, a 1989 film, one of only 3 films of Godzilla to come out in the 80s, which is so weird because if you look back at the 70s, there's a lot. You look back in the 90s, there's a lot. It seems like every decade had a lot, but 3 films.
The 80s. I'll say, you know what though, in Godzilla's defense, the 80s was a busy decade for film all across the board. Especially here in America, we were just putting out anything. We were just throwing out anything at the time.
That's true.
Everybody was high at the time. Like, yo, just put it out there. Explosions.
They put a lot of thought into that one. I liked, so I liked the tie-ins they did with Biollante. You know, like the scientist creating it, and why his story of, you know, with his daughter, and why he's creating it. Was his daughter, right? That was in the it was his daughter. It was in from the so this kicks off from the events of 1985.
Is a direct.
And so then we get into it, and like we have this doctor who creates the flower and Biollante, and with a mix of Godzilla's DNA, and it gets very interesting. It's an interesting tale. It's to me, it was Little Shop of Horrors versus Godzilla versus Carrie, and but I didn't hate it. I enjoyed the movie. I'm not trying to dumb it down or simplify it, but it was one of those 80s movies where you got a lot of elements of different horror. But it worked.
Well, horror is very sturdy from here on out. Horror is very important in the Godzilla films.
I feel like that element of it, and I even like the on the what is it? How do you say the other one's name? Biollante.
Biollante, yeah.
The rose on the head. I like that. I like that because it was like, it just, again, it made me think of. That made me think of more so, yes, the horror element, but also like the anime element, just with the rose, and I'm thinking or a katana and all that stuff. But just kind of like then a wild battle happens. Once that rose gets sliced or it opens up or something, shit goes down. And basically the same thing in this. once that, you know, once you see the rose and then it finally does open, shit goes down, and I'm like, this is what I want. This is exactly what I wanted. Didn't know I needed it, but I did. And I love like the darker tone of this film, and the darker elements gave it more of that horror tone, which Mick has been promising me for a while now, and we're finally here in the 80s with it.
Oh, but man, there's so many movies, popular movies from the 90s that they don't rip off, but they definitely add elements from. But I dig it all the way through.
Mhm.
And it starts here, and that's what I love about it, like adding that. And that's why I was like, as I'm watching this, I'm like, this is almost like, this reminds me of Friday 13th Part 7.
Ooh.
In a weird way, like just because of the ESP and like how it kind of plays
Mhm.
out and like the connection. But like it's that's why it felt so much like more like a creature feature.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And even any of the others really didn't feel like creature features. They felt like, you know, again, we call them kaiju films. That's, you know, like those big monster movies that really you were only seeing done in Japan.
Mhm.
Like even the creature features we were doing here, when we're not that I'm knocking them or saying I don't like them, they weren't the same, you know.
Yeah.
This for me was like one where, like, this is a monster movie, this is fun.
Mhm.
I had a good time with this one, and it kind of continues throughout because the horror elements are there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Would you guys, so Trevor, what do you think about this movie? I'd love to hear your impression.
Well, number one, I always loved this film. It's visually stunning. It takes an amazing amount of chances, and it also was, for a short time, both in VHS and then also DVD, promoted to the United States the time it came out, but did not do well. And both times it was pulled. We are officially entering the Hensai era. But you have to remember that Return of Godzilla was grandfathered in. So right off the bat, this movie owes so much more, and you know the people who made it war, and they said this. Godzilla versus the Smog Monster is the last time that Godzilla took as many chances in a series. I mean, if you look how the film just came to be, so they'd already decided that they were going to follow up Return of Godzilla, but they weren't sure how. They wanted a new flavor to the film, so they ran a send your Godzilla ideas in contest. And 5 will be picked, and those 5 will be given to the director. And it's Kazuki Omori. And he will pick out what he wants to direct, and he will write it. Well, he picked out a script that was an early version of Godzilla versus Biollante, which was written, I do not know the name of the individual, but by an individual who had written for the Ultraman shows, but had a background in science and paid his bills as a dentist. Now, Omori didn't start out in filmmaking. He actually had his educational background in bioscience. So when he read this idea, he ran with it. Just from the opening of this film, you're looking at something very different. It's extremely violent. You've got espionage just based on Godzilla DNA being picked up by, troopers or Navy SEALs or whatever. And then on top of that, you have the espionage of the super cool dude with the big old gun taking everybody out. And guess what? He works for Big Pharma. And Big Pharma is trying to literally make it that supposedly everywhere in the world will have wheat, and this is going to come from Godzilla. And this means a lot of scientists are working, and they know they're not working necessarily for the greater good, and then there's a terrorist attack. So right off the bat, you're dealing with some dark stuff. You're dealing with the fact that that scientist doesn't just hold, big technology, big, pharma into. They also, are pissed at the world. Hence why he creates a, Audrey 2 with, some really, really nasty elements with his daughter. And this film is flat out critical of the Japanese, specifically how the military is run. So, this film is, for me, very special based on those things.
I really had a good time with this movie.
Yeah.
I
Same
really
here.
like Godzilla vs. And I gotta tell you, when I read the premise, I was like, really? This is like the first one back. Like, I was very judgmental. I read the premise and I was like, oh, he's fighting a flower. Great. Like,
It's visually stunning.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
this
yeah.
was purely just like me
When the
doing research.
daughter comes out of Biollante.
Oh my god,
Oh,
this movie!
it's gorgeous.
I'm so
I mean,
glad. I'm
frame
so
for
glad when
frame,
I'm
I
wrong.
want to put it on my wall versus other gods.
It's such a good movie. It's such a great Godzilla movie too. And the funny thing is, like, we're adding all of these elements to it that are fantastical, mythical, and like, but they make sense because it seems like they're playing on a more scientific angle. Whereas, we got the Peanuts back in the day, and we got some other things, and even the aliens back then weren't very science fiction, So I'm really enjoying the step forward that the 80s brought us and where we're going, and I'm so excited for everybody to see it as well. This was a good one, and then, as you said, Kazuki Omori directed this, and he wrote this one. He also wrote and directed one we'll be talking about next week, which is King Godzilla versus King Ghidorah, and then he also wrote Godzilla versus Mothra Battle for Earth. And he wrote Godzilla versus Destroya, which are movies that are all going to be coming up in the next few weeks, and they're going to be a lot of fun. So you guys are going to really want to check this out.
But real quick, you mind if I just insert one thing?
Please do.
Kind of a little story. So we were all raised on Godzilla films, and they were syndicated. And what I brought up about the limited element of Biollante is the 1990s Godzillas, and this went for the Gamera era too, were very insular. They stayed in Japan. As collectors, we had to go back to the conventions. We had to get third generation DVD, if you were lucky, rips of Japanese Laserdisc. These films were not marketed to the United States. It wasn't till, about Millennium, which is the next step in the Godzilla series, that they started to become available. And, actually one of the biggest things to help these films has been streaming. And they're horrific, they're serious, they're pessimistic. You're in for a very different ride, but a very rewarding one. So I just wanted to add that. So thank you for letting me.
Some of the best storytelling.
Oh yeah.
And it's going to be a lot of fun. Like I said, like there's a lot of and I don't want to give away what's what where, but you see a very flagrant taking from Terminator 2 in one of the movies, and it seems ridiculous, but it works. It just, at the end of it, you're still like, but these characters will really pull you in. So I love the tones going forward, because I did not always care about the character development in the other movies. I'm like, Godzilla, I'm cool with it. These, like, I'm invested in the stories, and I'm really appreciating that about what they did in this next phase. And it starts here with Biollante, and we're gonna get into it more and more. So I want to thank you guys so much for joining today and being part of this supersized episode of Hail to the King, a Godzilla 70-year film retrospective. Thank you guys for joining. Thank you for being a part of it, watching. Remember to hit like, hit subscribe, hit that bell so you know when the next great episode of this and other great shows come out as well. We have such great things going on. If you like this, go check out snobsmerch.com. Use Godzilla for 10% off your order. All right, guys. But thank you, Trevor. Go check out.
Thank you so much, as always.
Yes, absolutely. And I want you guys to go down into the link, follow Trevor on his socials. Make sure you are checking out Ambassador Radio and Media. It's always a pleasure talking with you, my friend. And we're going to be doing a lot more. My good buddy Sturdy. If you guys aren't watching Horror with Sir Sturdy or listening to Horror with Sir Sturdy, you're missing out. And Popcorn and Pints is fantastic. And he has added a new one to the fold, and that is Sturdo Vision, and it is so much fun. And if you're not checking it out, you're really a horror fan. Let's be real. So go follow the man down below. But thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Mick. Thank you, Sturdy. It's been wonderful as always.
Had a great time.
And guys, as always, be kind, stay classy, and take care of yourselves. It's important. Bye. All right, we are